I had just wrapped up a work trip in Tennessee, and instead of flying straight home, I decided to take a few days to drive through some small towns on my way back to Alabama. It wasn't something I did often, but the idea of a quiet, scenic drive felt like the perfect way to decompress. About halfway through my drive, I realized it was getting late. The sun was setting faster than I expected, and I wasn't anywhere near a city. I pulled into a gas station off a dusty road to check for nearby motels. There weren't many options, but one listing caught my eye. A small bed and breakfast about 15 minutes away. It had good reviews and looked cozy in the photos. I called the number, and a warm, older woman answered. She said they had a vacancy and would be happy to have me. Relieved, I set my GPS and headed that way. The drive was peaceful at first. Rolling hills, thick trees on either side. But as I got closer, things felt different. The trees grew denser, the road narrower. The GPS finally announced my arrival at a 2-story Victorian-style house, tucked way back from the road, almost swallowed by the woods. The porch light was on, casting a golden glow across the driveway. I parked and grabbed my bag. The moment I stepped out, I noticed how quiet it was. No cars, no bugs, not even the wind, just this strange, thick silence. The front door creaked open before I even knocked. A woman in her 60s, wearing a long floral dress, greeted me with a smile. Her name was Margaret. She welcomed me inside, her voice soft and inviting, like a librarian. The house was beautiful but old. Heavy wooden furniture, lace curtains, faded floral wallpaper. It smelled like lavender and old books. Margaret showed me upstairs to a room at the end of the hall. It was small but charming. A 4-poster bed, an old vanity, and a tiny window overlooking the woods. She handed me a brass key and told me breakfast would be ready at 7 sharp. After a quick shower, I collapsed onto the bed, exhausted. I scrolled on my phone for a bit before drifting off to sleep. Somewhere deep in the night, I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. The room was dark, except for a faint, bluish light spilling in through the window. Probably moonlight. I lay still, listening. That's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing just outside my door. I froze, barely breathing. Maybe it was Margaret? Maybe she was checking on something? But the footsteps didn't move away. They just kept pacing back and forth. Back and forth. Right in front of my room. After a few minutes, I worked up the courage to get out of bed. I tiptoed over to the door and pressed my ear against it. Silence. I waited, heart pounding, until I convinced myself it was my imagination. I locked the door, just in case, crawled back into bed, and pulled the covers up to my chin. I must have fallen asleep again because the next thing I remember is waking up to something even worse. The sound of my door handle jiggling. Someone was trying to open the door slowly, gently. Like they didn't want to wake me if I wasn't already awake. I sat up straight in bed, my blood running cold. I watched as the brass handle wiggled slightly, then stopped. Then, just as suddenly, there was a soft knock, 3 taps, light but deliberate. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just stared at the door, every muscle in my body tense. After a few agonizing minutes, I heard retreating footsteps, not hurried, but slow and measured, moving away down the hall. I didn't sleep after that. I lay awake, listening to every creak and groan of the old house, waiting for the door to jiggle again. When morning finally came, I jumped out of bed the second the sky turned gray. I threw on my clothes, grabbed my bag, and rushed downstairs. Margaret was in the kitchen, humming softly and flipping pancakes. She greeted me like nothing was wrong, smiling warmly. "Sleep well, dear?" she asked. I hesitated. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to ask her if anyone else was staying there last night. But something about the way she looked at me, this calm, almost too pleasant expression, made my stomach twist. Instead, I just nodded stiffly and said, "Breakfast smelled great." As I ate quickly, I noticed something out the window. Something I hadn't seen when I arrived the night before. Beyond the tree line, just barely visible, was an old shed. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The wood was rotting, the door half hanging off its hinges. Curious, and wanting an excuse to get outside, I thanked Margaret for breakfast, said goodbye, and loaded my things into the car. But instead of leaving right away, I wandered over to the shed. The morning was still and cold, and the ground was soft beneath my shoes. When I reached the shed, I noticed that the door wasn't just hanging open. It looked like it had been forced open recently. Splintered wood, fresh scrapes on the ground where it had swung back and forth. I pushed it open wider and peered inside. At first, it was too dark to see anything. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw them, rows of clothes, hanging from nails in the walls. Old coats, dresses, shirts all worn and weathered, like they had been there for years, maybe decades. And then my heart dropped. One of the coats, a heavy black one, dust-coated and moth-eaten, looked eerily familiar. It was the exact kind of coat that could have easily been mistaken for a figure standing silently in the dark. I backed away quickly, a chill running down my spine. I didn't wait around to explore further. I got in my car and drove off without looking back. As I pulled onto the road, I caught a glimpse of Margaret standing on the porch, still smiling, still waving, like she already knew I wouldn't be back. Even now, sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I think I hear it again, the soft creak of old wooden floors, pacing, just outside my door. When I was 17, I had a part-time job working at a small, family-owned diner just outside of town. It wasn't anything glamorous, but the pay was decent, and the owners were kind enough to drive me home when they could. One night, though, the owners had to leave early because of a family emergency, and I was stuck closing with one of the new hires, a guy named Tyler who lived in the opposite direction from me. I didn't want to be a burden, so I told him I'd just walk home. It wasn't that far, about a 25-minute walk. I figured I'd pop in my earbuds, listen to music, and enjoy the cool night air. At first, the walk was peaceful. The streets were empty except for a few cars passing by now and then. I cut through the main road and then took a shortcut through a quieter residential area. As I was walking under a broken streetlight, I heard its footsteps. They weren't hurried. They weren't slow. They were steady. At first, I assumed it was just another person heading home. No big deal. I mean, it was a neighborhood. People lived here. But when I crossed the street, and they crossed too, and when I slowed down and the steps matched my pace, I felt that sinking feeling in my stomach. I risked a glance over my shoulder. There he was. A man wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face, hands tucked into his pockets. He wasn't close enough to make it obvious he was following me, but close enough to unsettle me. I picked up my pace slightly, pretending to check my phone. I texted my older brother. Walking home, some guys behind me, just FYI. No response. He was probably asleep. I told myself not to panic. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he wasn't paying any attention to me at all. I took a left turn, a narrow street lined with trees. Fewer streetlights here. Less visibility. I hated that turn immediately, but it was the fastest way home. That's when I heard it again, the same footsteps, just a little faster now. I turned my head, and this time, he was closer. Too close. And he smiled. Not a friendly smile, something else. Something that made my skin crawl. I switched sidewalks, practically jogging across the street without looking. He followed, same side. My heart was hammering. I pulled out my phone and called my brother. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. I cursed under my breath. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a convenience store about a block ahead. Its neon lights buzzing in the dark like a beacon. I decided then. Run for it. I started moving faster, pretending like I wasn't running away, but my legs were stiff with fear. I heard him pick up his pace behind me, the heavy sound of boots on the pavement faster, heavier, closer. When I reached the store, I practically threw the door open and stumbled inside. The cashier, a bored-looking teenager, barely glanced up. I pretended to browse the snack aisle, keeping one eye on the door. After a few seconds, the man appeared at the glass front of the store. He didn't come in. He just stood there, staring, grinning. I mouthed to the cashier, "Can you call the police?" He looked at me blankly for a second, then seemed to get it. He reached for the phone. Meanwhile, I ducked behind a shelf, trying not to be visible from the front windows. I texted my brother again frantically. "Call me. Emergency." A few minutes passed. The guy outside started pacing back and forth. He looked agitated. He kept glancing at the store, muttering to himself. Finally, red and blue lights flashed at the end of the street. 2 police cruisers pulled up. The man took off running down the block. 2 officers jumped out and gave chase. Another officer came inside and asked me questions. I gave them a full description jacket, hat, dirty jeans, scuffed boots, everything I could remember. My brother finally called me, panicked, and rushed over to meet me. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Every little sound made me jump. But it wasn't over yet. A week later, I was leaving work again, this time, with my brother picking me up when I saw something taped to the diner door. It was a Polaroid picture. A picture of me. Walking, at night, Written across the bottom in messy handwriting were the words, "See you soon." It happened the summer I turned 19. My two best friends, Jake and Megan, and I decided to take a cheap road trip across the northern states. Nothing fancy, just a car, a map, and an open road. We planned to camp at random spots along the way to save money. No hotel bookings, just figure it out as we went. One evening, after driving for hours, we found ourselves way behind schedule. The sun was setting, and we hadn't found a campsite yet. Megan found a state forest on Google Maps that supposedly allowed overnight camping. It was a little out of the way, but we didn't have many options. We pulled into a dirt parking lot at the edge of the woods just as the last bit of sunlight faded. The place was deserted. No other cars, no lights, just endless trees and a narrow trail leading deeper into the forest. A sign near the entrance confirmed it. Primitive camping allowed. We decided to set up our tents closer to the lot, not feeling great about hiking deep into the dark woods. As we unpacked, I noticed an old, rusted-out truck abandoned near the edge of the trees. The windows were shattered, and it looked like it had been there for years. It gave me a bad feeling, but Jake just joked. Maybe Bigfoot parks here. We laughed it off and kept setting up. By nightfall, our tents were ready. We sat by a small fire, roasting marshmallows and playing music from a Bluetooth speaker. The forest felt alive around us, branches snapping in the distance, owls hooting, the occasional rustle of leaves. Typical outdoor sounds, nothing sinister. But around midnight, something changed. We heard it heavy, dragging footsteps coming from the trail. Slow, deliberate, crunching over dry leaves. We froze. The fire crackled between us, casting just enough light to make the darkness beyond it even more terrifying. Jake whispered, "Probably just a deer." But these weren't deer sounds. They were human footsteps. We killed the music, snuffed out the fire, and sat completely still inside the tents, peeking out through the barely zipped flaps. That's when we saw him. A man, tall and gaunt, emerged from the trail. He wore dark clothing, almost blending into the forest. His head moved in slow, jerky motions, like he was scanning the area. In his hands, he held something long and metallic. At first, I thought it was a crowbar, but when he turned slightly, I realized it was a shovel. He stood there, staring at the fire pit we had left smoldering. Then, without warning, he began digging into the dirt just a few feet away from where we had been sitting minutes earlier. None of us dared move or even breathe loudly. I could hear Megan quietly crying beside me, her hand clamped over her mouth. After a few minutes of digging, he stopped, wiped his forehead, and muttered something we couldn't hear. He turned and stared directly at our tents. I don't know if he actually saw us. Maybe the darkness protected us. But that moment, that horrible, endless second of eye contact, burned itself into my brain forever. Then he slowly walked back into the forest, shovel dragging behind him, metal scraping against stone and dirt. We sat in paralyzed silence for what felt like hours. But it wasn't over. Around 2:30 a.m., headlights flickered through the trees. 2 cars pulled into the lot, one of them definitely not a ranger or cop car. They parked crookedly, doors swinging open before the engines even shut off. We could hear harsh, whispered arguments. Then, a loud bang, like something heavy hitting the side of a car. Megan whimpered, and I had to physically clamp my hand over her mouth to keep her quiet. Suddenly, the argument stopped. Footsteps. Multiple sets, moving toward the tents. Jake texted me from the other tent, "Stay dead still." I could hear my own heart pounding louder than the rustling outside. One set of steps stopped directly outside our tent. A voice, low and gravelly, muttered something in a language I didn't recognize. Then the zipper on our tent twitched, like someone testing if it would open. I nearly passed out from fear. But before the zipper could be pulled, the sound of sirens erupted in the distance. The men cursed loudly, scrambled into their cars, and sped off, tires throwing dirt into the air. We didn't move for the rest of the night. At first light, we packed everything in under 5 minutes, throwing the tents in the trunk without even folding them. As we drove out, we saw a sheriff's cruiser parked by the entrance. We didn't stop. We didn't look back. Later that afternoon, at a gas station 2 towns away, I overheard locals talking about a body found buried near the State Forest campground. The body had been discovered early that morning by police responding to reports of suspicious vehicles in the area. We never found out who the men were, or why the man with the shovel had been digging so close to our campfire. But every time I close my eyes and remember that night, I wonder, were they planning to bury something? Or someone? And were we next? When I was 23, I moved back home after college to save up some money before getting my own place. My parents had a finished basement with its own entrance, and they let me stay there rent-free as long as I helped out around the house. Honestly, it was perfect. Private enough that I still felt independent, but close enough that I didn't feel completely on my own. The basement was cozy, a living room area, small kitchenette, bedroom, and bathroom. The main door led to a stairwell that connected to the upstairs kitchen, but I usually kept it locked from my side. I also had my own door to the backyard. One weekend, my parents left to visit my aunt a few towns over, planning to stay the night. That meant I had the house all to myself. I invited a couple of friends over, Ryan and Chris, just to chill, play video games, have a few drinks, nothing crazy. We hung out until pretty late, just laughing, playing some old school games and eating junk food. Around 2 a.m., Ryan decided he was too tired to drive home, so he crashed on the couch. Chris lived only a few minutes away, so he headed out. Before going to bed, I did my usual routine, locked the side door, double-checked the stairwell door was bolted, and then passed out hard. At some point during the night, I woke up to a faint noise. At first, I thought it was part of a dream. It was this light tapping sound, like something brushing against wood. I sat up, blinking, trying to figure out what it was. Then I heard it again, this time more clearly, a slow, deliberate tapping right against my bedroom door. At first, I thought maybe Ryan got confused looking for the bathroom. I called out quietly, "Yo, dude, wrong door!" But there was no answer. The tapping stopped. A little creeped out, but way too tired to care, I flopped back onto my bed and eventually drifted off. The next morning, Ryan was already gone when I woke up. I shot him a text asking if he knocked on my door during the night. He replied almost immediately, saying he never even got up once. He'd passed out on the couch and slept straight through. I laughed it off, chalking it up to maybe just the house making noises, or me half dreaming it. That night, I stayed in again. I watched a movie, grabbed a late snack, locked up, and got ready for bed. Just as I was about to shut my eyes, I heard something again. This time, it wasn't tapping, it was creaking. Like slow, cautious footsteps, right above my ceiling, the upstairs kitchen. My first thought was that my parents had come home early. But when I checked my phone, there were no texts or missed calls. Besides, it was nearly 3 a.m. I held my breath and listened carefully. The footsteps moved from the kitchen, across the floor. stopping somewhere above the stairwell. I sat up in bed, adrenaline spiking. Every instinct in my body told me something was wrong. I grabbed the small baseball bat I kept next to my bed, a leftover habit from living off campus, and tiptoed to my bedroom door. I pressed my ear against it. Silence. I didn't know what to do. Call my parents? Call the cops? Tell myself I was being paranoid? That's when the door handle to the stairwell connecting to upstairs clicked. I froze. It was locked. I was sure it was locked, but someone was testing it from the other side. I backed away, heart racing, and quietly texted my parents, just in case. No response. I texted Ryan. Nothing. I waited, barely breathing, gripping the bat tighter. Minutes dragged by. Finally, I forced myself to slowly crack open my bedroom door and peek into the basement living room. Everything seemed normal, but the stairwell door had a shadow underneath it. The faintest, shifting darkness, like someone standing right on the other side. I retreated back into my room and locked the door. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. I whispered into the phone, telling the operator what was happening. She kept me calm, said officers were already on their way, and told me to stay hidden. I waited. Every creak of the house made my blood turn to ice. I thought I heard something moving upstairs again, but I couldn't be sure if it was real or just my mind playing tricks. Finally, there was a knock on my bedroom window. I peeked through the blinds and saw a police officer outside. I opened the window enough to hand him the key to the backyard door. A few minutes later, I heard them sweep through the house boots, pounding the floor above me. Then a voice called out, telling me it was safe to come out. I met them upstairs, my legs barely supporting me. 2 officers were standing by the kitchen, and one was pointing to the pantry door. It was cracked open just a hair. They pulled it fully open and revealed a man crouched inside, dirty, wild-eyed, and clutching a kitchen knife to his chest. He didn't say a word as they dragged him out in handcuffs. He just stared at me with this blank, hollow look, like he wasn't even really there. Apparently, the back door upstairs had been left unlocked. He must have slipped in sometime that evening while I was downstairs, completely unaware. The scariest part is that the police said based on how cold he was and how dirty his clothes were, he had probably been hiding in the house for hours before he ever made a sound. If I hadn't locked the stairwell door, if I hadn't heard that tapping the night before, who knows what would have happened. I moved out of my parents' place 2 weeks later. Some nights, even now, I still wake up and swear I hear footsteps in the ceiling.